This mother allegedly strangled her 11-year-old son to protect him from financial worries. A mother from Pennsylvania, 50-year-old Ruth DiRienzo Whitehead, has been charged with the murder of her son, Matthew. The 11-year-old's body was discovered deceased in their home by his father at around 7 a.m. in the morning. He also noticed that his wife was missing. The family's Toyota was missing as well from their drive. Ruth has defended her actions by saying that Matthew had been upset and crying off and on all day about the family's financial difficulties. She claims she didn't want him growing up that way, so she strangled him with her husband's belt as he slept. The boy had ligature marks around his neck and his face was swollen. Police found the missing vehicle off Beach Avenue in Cape May, where Ruth had seemingly driven it into the ocean. She was then discovered 6 miles away. Police found the murder weapon, a black men's belt, on the floor of the driver's side of the car.
These are pictures that get worse the longer you look at them. Part 1. Up first is this picture, and at first glance it just looks like some pillars from ancient Rome. But if you take a closer look and squint your eyes a little bit, you will see something kind of creepy. Right when you squint your eyes, you will see the Twin Towers burning. This is absolutely insane, and let me know if you saw it without squinting your eyes. Next up is a picture of a man next to some sort of volcano opening. Or at least that's what it looks like at first glance. But if you take a closer look, it actually looks like humans being sucked into hell. This might be one of the creepiest pictures on the internet once you see it. Next up is this picture, and after looking at it once, you probably don't notice anything. But trust me, just keep looking at this photo and I guarantee you keep noticing scary things. For example, look at the waitress with the knife, look at the mom's arm, and look at the cup of coffee. Those are just 3 things you could spot pretty quickly, but trust me, just keep looking. And if it helps, just pause the video or screenshot this photo.
What this man did to his 6-year-old daughter is seriously disturbing. 50-year-old John Edward Kraft from Waynesburg, Pennsylvania, was arrested on the 21st of October 2022. This was after his 6-year-old daughter's siblings told police the horrors that had been going on in their house. They told police that the man had been physically and emotionally abusive to the 6-year-old girl. The little girl's face and body was found to have severe bruising. Police interviewed her and her siblings and found out some seriously disturbing facts. The father would allegedly impose barbaric forms of punishment on the child, including beating and strangling. Another part of his sick punishments involved a hole in the yard that he had dug. He would constantly take the child and bury her alive in the hole in the garden, sometimes overnight. This left the child smelling like sewage, according to police. He's been charged with 3 counts of aggravated assault and 1 count of strangulation, unlawful restraint, false imprisonment of a minor, and endangering the welfare of a child. One attorney told the media it was one of the worst cases of child abuse he'd ever seen.
Did The Simpsons actually do it again? Okay, so we all know about the wildfires in Maui, right? Well, just watch this video and let's talk about it after. So yeah, what do you think about all of that? There's a whole conspiracy that there was a laser weapon involved in Maui, and the video of the laser that I just showed you was not from Maui. That was from a couple months back, but what if that was the same thing that was used in Maui? Either way, this whole situation is extremely weird and just unsettling. But yeah, let me know your thoughts and if you think The Simpsons predicted it.
Tragedy unfolded in the early hours of Monday morning in Oklahoma this week, which left 5 members of this family dead. The Candy family consisted of mum, dad, and their 4 sons, as well as 2 dogs. 3 of these boys were shot dead Monday night. The 3rd boy, the youngest one, who was 10, seemingly slept through all of it. It appears that Dad Jonathan shot his wife Lindsay after an argument. He then shot 3 of his sons dead. They ranged between the ages of 12 and 18. The youngest son, who was 10 years old, slept through it all and he woke Monday morning to find his whole family dead. His dad Jonathan had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He phoned 911 and told them what he'd found. I cannot imagine the horror he felt when he woke to find his whole family gone. My first thoughts when I heard this was, are they sure that it was a murder-suicide? Could somebody have maybe broken in and staged it to look that way? But apparently there were no signs of a break-in, and they are sure that it was Jonathan that killed his family. The question remains is, why did he spare just one child?
This is the last photo of Maura Murray, who disappeared in 2004 in New Hampshire after draining her entire bank account at an ATM. On the day of her disappearance, she told the nursing faculty school that she worked at that she was going to be out of town for a family death. The family said that that was not true. They said that no death had even occurred in the family. Now, after 7 p.m., Murray crashed her car into a tree. A bus driver nearby that witnessed the accident asked her if she needed any help. She declined and urged him to not call the police. He continued driving and decided to call the police anyways and report the incident. The police arrived on scene at 7:43 p.m., but Murray was nowhere to be found. Upon investigating the car, they found wine and beer bottles, but they didn't find any of her IDs, credit cards, debit cards, or cell phone. In fact, her credit card, debit cards, and cell phone had not been used in years before her disappearance. In 2019, a radar detected movement around where she lived, so they went to investigate the basement. Nothing was found. Police treated this as a missing persons case, but a voluntary missing persons case because it seemed like she didn't want to be found. As of 2023, her disappearance is still a mystery and still unsolved as to why she decided to do all this. Let me know what you guys think about Maura Murray's case in the comment section below. And as always, these videos are for informational purposes only.
1-year-old Roman Santos, who was the subject of an Amber Alert recently, has been found and taken into police custody. Roman was abducted on April 21st after his 17-year-old mother, Angelica Santos, was shot dead by her ex-boyfriend, 39-year-old Elias Huazar. Elias had also just shot dead his ex-wife, Amber Rodriguez, outside an elementary school in front of their 9-year-old son. The ex-policeman had then fled in the direction of Mexico with his 1-year-old son, Roman. Elias was actually due to appear in court on Monday this week, which is when the killings occurred. He was accused of the rape of 2 girls, his ex-girlfriend and her friend. He was actually out on bail when the murders occurred. It's alleged that he used to work at the school where his ex-girlfriend attended. He groomed this child, he then got her pregnant, and he's now murdered her, leaving their son without a mother. This is the moment 1-year-old Roman was rescued by police officers after a pursuit with Elias. Elias was actually found in the front seat of his car. He was dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The search for this 12-year-old boy came to a tragic end this month, almost 4 years after he went missing. This story is just sad all round, even more so because Jalen's mother, who never lost hope of finding him, passed away in September last year. Joanne had actually suffered a double tragedy, first with Jalen going missing, and then her other son, Jalen's older brother, being shot dead just steps away from their family home. She lost her 12-year-old son and then her 18-year-old son within 3 months of each other. 12-year-old Jalen went missing on the 4th of August 2020. He was going out to the shop just like a normal day. He told his mum he'd be home soon, but he never returned home. His body was found on April 15th this year. He was in the attic of a house just 5 miles away from his family home. He was found by a utility worker that had gone into the attic of this home. They'd found Jalen's body and it was that badly decomposed that he had to be identified via dental records, which just shows how long he has been up there. A birthday memorial service was held this week for Jalen as he would have turned 16 on April 22nd. The investigation is obviously still ongoing and police are trying to work out what he was doing up there, who put him up there, what happened to him, how he died, and how long he has been in that attic.
A 23-year-old exchange student from Brazil was left paralyzed after eating a can of soup. This is Claudia de Albuquerque Salada. She was living in Aspen, Colorado when all of this went down in February, and she had been in America on an exchange program. So one day in February, Claudia began to feel ill at work. She was experiencing a shortness of breath, blurred vision, and dizziness. She went home that evening, but it wasn't bad enough to go to the hospital. The next day, however, she messaged her family and friends and said that the sickness was only getting worse. And when her friends arrived to bring her to the hospital, she could barely breathe on her own and her face was almost entirely paralyzed. Now, they believe that Claudia had contracted botulism, which is a very, very rare disease that is contracted usually from eating contaminated foods. Apparently, it took 15 days after Claudia's first symptom appeared to diagnose her with botulism, but at that point she was too far gone. And botulism is a pretty deadly disease. It's a very rare but serious illness that attacks the body's system through a toxin. So we don't have any formal update on Claudia yet, but she has been left almost completely paralyzed. And with hospital bills being over $10,000 a day here in America, her bill was absolutely enormous. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast that I co-host with my wife, Murder in America, available on all streaming platforms.
My daughter gave birth to my 7 children.
The man behind me hunted somebody down and smashed a wine glass on their head because they didn't like his book. The man's name is Richard Britton. He's an author from the UK who posted his unfinished book online. He received a lot of positive feedback for his book, but one person, Paige Rollin, left a comment that irked him. She commented, "Bored out of my skull," in reference to his book. This dude took it so personally. He traveled from London to Scotland, about 500 miles. That's where he found Paige stacking cereal in the cereal aisle, grabbed a wine glass, and smashed it over her head. Despite having a wine glass smashed on her head, thankfully she wasn't really injured. Following the attack, Richard Britton was arrested and served 30 months in prison. It also should be noted, he tracked her down using Facebook. And this was not his first incident of tracking someone down using social media. In university, he had a classmate named Ella Durant that he stalked. He used her Instagram and Twitter to find her on 2 separate occasions just to speak with her. After his arrest, he was banned from using electronic devices to find out where people were. Which honestly, smart move. This dude is weird. It's like real life you. Let me know what you guys think about the Richard Britton case in the comments section below. And as always, these videos are for informational purposes only.
The man in that video, Sergio Mario Lima de Santana, died while he was vlogging when a support beam collapsed and the zipline that he was on came crashing to the ground. 39-year-old Sergio was an average guy, and he was on vacation at a resort in Brazil called the Canoa Quebrada Resort. On that day, Sergio decided he wanted to make use of the zipline that was on property. After all, it looked like a beautiful, fun thing to go do. But he had no idea that a part of the zipline support structure was weak. And tragically, Sergio heading down the zipline was the straw that broke the camel or zipline's back. In the video, Sergio can be seen smiling, hollering, and enjoying his last moments on Earth, before suddenly the zipline collapses and he plummets to his death. This is an actual picture of local investigators checking out the collapsed support beam. After this incident, officials in the local city banned all ziplines for the moment. And eventually, the 35-year-old owner of the zipline company was charged with manslaughter in Sergio's death. I don't know exactly who got charged with what or convicted of what in this case, but this video is definitely haunting, disturbing, and it was captured sadly in multiple angles. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
5-year-old boy named Patrick Morrissey saved his mom and helped solve a murder mystery. This happened to the Morrissey family, which consisted of Linda Kay Morrissey and Joe Morrissey, and their adopted son Patrick Morrissey, victims of a home invasion. And even when they complied to everything, it wasn't enough, because the dad's last words to his son was, Patrick, just lay down and pretend that you're sleeping. After that, he ends up getting stabbed to death. What the fuck? Before the robbers left, the robber ends up pouring gasoline on the floor and lights the house on fire. Since Linda was still tied up, the only person that could save her was Patrick. He grabs the scissors, gives it to her. She's able to cut the bonds off. They make it out alive. During the interrogation of Linda, she says that she has a hunch on who it might be. A tenant from them.
Right now, I'm suing him because I fell down the stairs in the house because of the lack of repairs. He stopped talking to me because of the lawsuit.
Did you call anybody?
Actually, my son called me. He needed money, but I won't help.
Which son?
Randy Jr. First off, he's wanted by the law. Secondly, he's a crack addict.
They go get Randy Jr. They interrogate him.
I did not commit this murder. I did call my dad. He's been a good father. Like, he tried to direct me the right way and I go the wrong way.
And at this point, the investigators are kind of frustrated because they don't have no solid leads to anybody. And then out of nowhere, Randy Sr.'s younger son, Sean, calls the cops and says straight up, my dad did it. And the cops are like, alright, how the fuck are we gonna believe you? How do we know that you didn't do it? And then he was like, alright, give me 2 hours with him. I'll get him to confess to the whole thing. They end up putting...
I can't believe I'd never heard of this sickening hazing death. Tim Piazza was a 19-year-old student at Pennsylvania State University. On a fateful night in February 2017, he was served 18 drinks in less than 90 minutes during a pledge initiation called the Gauntlet. Now, he'd eaten virtually nothing beforehand, and the activity involved each pledge drinking from a vodka bottle, downing a beer, and then drinking from a bag of wine. Due to being extremely intoxicated, he actually fell down a flight of stairs and knocked himself unconscious. 4 males then carried him up the stairs onto a sofa and prodded him to try and wake him up. When he failed to regain consciousness, instead of just ringing emergency services straight away, they just walked away and left him. Now, a newly initiated member called Cordell Davis actually tried to call for help when he saw what a state Tim was in. However, rather than coming to the rescue, one of the frat members actually held him up against a wall and told him that they had it under control. Throughout the night, Tim's condition just got progressively worse. He would regain consciousness, get up or try and get up, and then fall over at least another 4 times. Finally, 12 hours after his initial fall, they eventually called 911 for him. However, it was too late to save Tim. He was taken to hospital, but he did die the following day. Tragically, the surgeon told Tim's family that if help had been called sooner, Tim may still be alive today. This case resulted in one of the largest hazing prosecutions in US history. 18 members of the fraternity were charged. 8 were charged with involuntary manslaughter and the rest with other offenses, including hazing.
On November 8, 2010, Jennifer Pan, she called 911, right?
Please just don't calm down. What some people broke into our house and paid to show us all his money? Okay, ma'am, where are you? Can you spell the your name for me, please? Dad?
What the fuck?
Ma'am, hello? Someone broke in and I heard shots like pops. I don't know what's happening. I'm tied upstairs.
That whole day was just a regular ass day. The dad ended up going upstairs to sleep, and then the mom was downstairs just watching TV. Waited till 9:30 p.m. She went to the door and unlocked it, and then you just see the light in one of the rooms in the house flick on and off twice.
That's a sign.
And she had also sent a text to David, which was one of the hitmen, saying VIP access. They go in, asked for all the money, tied her to a banister, and shot her parents after.
Yeah, but the way she sounds, it sounds like she was not behind all this stuff.
Exactly. How could she have called 911 while she was tied? Just keep in mind, it's a break-in, right? How the fuck are they gonna leave money in plain sight? And they're also gonna leave a Benz, a Lexus, when the keys were on top of the counter. Everything was still intact, bro. The only thing that happened was the mom died, but the dad, he was induced in a coma. And then on November 12th, the dad wakes up from the coma. The dad wakes up from the coma and says that she was in on it. When they were there, they were tied up and shit. She was walking around with them and talking and discussing the plan.
Imagine finding out your dad was an escaped murderer using a false identity. In 1967, a killer escaped. William Arnold was a young man who had killed his parents when he was a teenager and had been placed behind bars. However, he managed to escape from his prison in Nebraska, and for decades, nobody heard from him. Recently, a DNA test has uncovered the truth about what happened to the escaped killer. In 1958, William got into an argument with his parents. They wouldn't let him use their car to take his girlfriend to the cinema, so he shot them to death. Shockingly, he then buried them in the garden and still had the time to take his girlfriend to the drive-in cinema. He managed to hide the truth for a while, telling family and friends that his parents were on a trip. However, weeks later, he ended up confessing and being sentenced to life in prison, aged just 17. While in prison, William and his friend hatched an escape plan. They managed to break free in 1967 and no one ever heard from William again. Police later discovered he changed his name to John Damon and started a whole new life. He met a woman, married her and helped to look after her 4 children. They then later divorced and he moved to Australia. He remarried and actually had children of his own. He passed away in 2010 and everyone remembered John Damon as such a great dad. But in 2022, the truth came out. Investigators had been working behind the scenes to figure out what happened to William Arnold, and eventually they told his family the truth. Speaking to a news station, William's son said this: "Although it's shocking to know that his life began with a terrible crime, his legacy is so much more than that. I want him to be remembered for being a good father, a provider to us, and instilling in me a passion for music and a drive to always be the best person I can be."
Did Jeffrey Epstein kill himself? Let's talk about it. Jeffrey Epstein had allegedly attempted suicide once before, a couple weeks before he was found dead in his prison cell. His cellmate at the time, 52-year-old Nick Tartaglione, who was a crooked cop who allegedly murdered 4 people, was the one that Epstein claimed tried to attack him that day. He went on record and said that it wasn't a suicide attempt. He claimed that this guy had tried to murder him in his cell, but Nick and his attorneys stated that that wasn't true and he was eventually cleared by jail officials. But what's interesting is that after all of this went down, after Epstein was dead and the trial against Nick was proceeding, he and his attorneys requested the video surveillance footage from that day so that they could show that Nick had good character. They were claiming that on that day, Nick had actually attempted to help resuscitate Jeffrey Epstein. But they were told by the prison system that the footage, once again like the other footage we just talked about, was gone. Keep in mind that his lawyers requested this footage 2 days after the incident occurred, so 2 days after Epstein's suicide attempt, Nick and his attorney team requested to have that footage saved, but it still disappeared. So after this, a judge in New York requested that the government find the missing footage, and several days later, the federal government said, "Oh, we do have the footage." But then fast forward a little bit later, the government went back on their claims and said that the footage was completely gone and it had been deleted because of a clerical error. So this is the second set of missing video clips from all of Jeffrey Epstein's time in prison. So after Epstein took his own life, obviously stuff like hashtag Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself and stuff like that took over the internet. And at the time, the mayor of New York himself, Bill de Blasio, had something to say about all this. This is a quote from Bill de Blasio: "Something doesn't fit here. It just doesn't make sense that the highest profile prisoner in America, someone forgot to guard him." In addition, Jane Doe number 15, she went on the record in November of 2019 after Epstein took his own life, and she alleged that she had been sexually assaulted by him years earlier. She wore a bracelet featuring the phrase "Epstein didn't kill himself" to a press conference, which possibly indicated that she herself believed in the theory. Then there's this interesting clip from Amy Robach of ABC News.
"I've had the story for 3 years. I've had this interview with Virginia Roberts. We would not put it on the air. First of all, I was told, who's Jeffrey Epstein? No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story. Then the palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. We were so afraid we wouldn't be able to interview Kate and Will that also quashed the story. She told me everything. She had pictures. She had everything. It was unbelievable what we had. Clinton, we had everything. Do I think he was killed? 100%. Yes, I do. Because he made his whole living blackmailing people. There were a lot of men in those planes, a lot of men who visited that island, a lot of powerful men who came into that apartment.
This man is considered the UK's Jeffrey Dahmer. In February 1983, a plumber was called out to an apartment in London. Residents were having issues with blocked drains, but nothing could have prepared this Dino Rod employee for what he found. He discovered the blockage was caused by human flesh and bones. Dennis Nilsen was a resident in the building and was there at the time and actually commented, "It looks to me like someone has been flushing down their Kentucky Fried Chicken." It turned out Dennis was the culprit. It was him who'd been trying to flush human remains down the drainage system. Growing up, Dennis had struggled to come to terms with his sexuality. At 16, he joined the army where he was a butcher. He then became a police officer once he left. and he developed a sick fascination with dead bodies. In his personal life, he wanted to meet men, but he would feel lonely when they left him. He therefore came up with a sick plan to make sure they could never leave. His first victim was actually a 14-year-old boy. He met him at a pub before plying him with alcohol and eventually strangling and drowning him. Disgustingly, he then washed his body and took it to bed and attempted to SA it. Dennis would later go on to justify him abusing corpses by saying that they don't feel anything or suffer, so it was fine for him to do what he wanted with them once the person was dead. Now, before moving house, he was actually hiding his victims' bodies under the floorboards, but when the smell became too much, he started burying them in the garden. When Dennis moved house, he had to change up his disposal method. He thought flesh would go into the sewers and just never be found. He was obviously very wrong about this. He was eventually caught when the plumber alerted police of the rotting flesh that he'd discovered. Dennis calmly showed the police the bag of body parts he kept in his wardrobe. Between 1978 and 1983, he'd killed at least 12 people. He was eventually sentenced to life in prison. He expressed no remorse and no desire to be free. If you enjoy my longer content, please do make sure that you follow my YouTube because TikTok have taken away my 10-minute function.
The Chris Chan story is one of the most disturbing things I've ever read about, and you don't want to hear what they did with their mother. The story of Chris Chan is a very, very disturbing and complicated one. But in 2007, she created a comic called Sonichu, and for some reason people were really attracted to this, and they started to become infatuated with the comic's creator, Chris Chan. Now, the comics themselves are bizarre, but they're not really that special. And people really latched onto this story for some reason. They wanted to follow Chris Chan's life. And a lot of this original stuff that was going on was trolling, but it began to take a really, really strange turn. Now, in 2015, Chris and her mom had to attend a court hearing because allegedly she had assaulted a video game store employee. And at that point, people began to notice that Chris was very close to her mom. Then, the following year in 2016, Chris wrote a Facebook post defending a mother and son in Mexico who said that they were in love with each other. She basically wrote and defended incest and said that in some cases it isn't bad if a parent and their offspring have these relations with each other. And she even wrote that she had had dreams of having intercourse with her own mother. But then, fast forward to 2021, and screenshots and a recording were leaked that allegedly show Chris Chan discussing how they have abused and slept with their own mother. Apparently, the person on this recording that claims to be Chris claims that they have assaulted their mother 3 times a week for the last couple of months, and that the mom has memory problems and can't really recall what's going on. This was obviously concerning, but on August 1st, 2021, this all came to a head when Chris Chan was arrested on a felony incest charge. Yes, Chris was accused of actually having sex with their own mother. Now, this is a felony in Virginia, the state that Chris lives in, but to this date, there's still no real resolution in the case. Apparently, Chris was released from jail on March 27th of this year and has another hearing on August 8th when we're going to find out more details about exactly what happened, what evidence prosecutors have. But no matter how you look at this entire situation, this is just disturbing to me.
Police were recently called to a home in West Virginia where they found this little girl deceased in a skeletal state on her bathroom floor. Her mom has now been arrested in connection with her death. This is 14-year-old Kennedy Miller. On the morning of April 17th, the Boone County Sheriff's Department were called to her Morrisville home for a death call. She lived in the home with her mom and grandparents. When they arrived, they found Kennedy on the bathroom floor in an emaciated skeletal state. Someone in the home reportedly called 911 after she suffered cardiac arrest, and police are describing the scene as shocking and incredibly disturbing. According to the criminal complaint, prior to her death, Kennedy had only stepped outside twice in the past 4 years, and she hadn't been to school since 2019. Kennedy reportedly suffered from an eating disorder for several years and hadn't been eating for months, according to a family member. Due to her physical state, authorities believe that she hadn't been able to function on her own for at least 4 or 5 days before her death. Police state that Kennedy's eating disorder had never been diagnosed or medically documented. Investigators believe that her mom, 49-year-old Julie Stone Miller, failed to get Kennedy medical attention for at least 4 years based on the overwhelming visible condition of her body and the clear and distinct physical problems that she endured. They fully believe that this neglect is what ultimately caused Kennedy's death. Her death and declining health went unchecked for so long, authorities believe, partly because she hadn't attended school since 2019, and neighbors hadn't even seen Kennedy since 2019. At that time, they say that she seemed okay, but they were unaware of the severity of the situation. They did add sad that they had seen state police making possible wellness checks over the years, but they never suspected any abuse or neglect in the house because they knew Kennedy's grandparents, who are reportedly well respected in the community. But because of the gruesome nature of her death and the state of her body, police are now investigating her death. Julie's cousin reportedly said that for years she asked about Kennedy and where she was, and when they never got a response, CPS and law enforcement were called in to check on her. But sadly, whatever was happening behind closed doors went unnoticed all those years. Julie has since been arrested in connection to her daughter's death and has been charged with felony child neglect resulting in death. She faces between 3 and 15 years in prison and a possible fine of up to $5,000 if convicted of the charges. She is currently being held at Southwestern Regional Jail on a $250,000 bond, and her next court date is set for April 29th. Kennedy's autopsy report is still pending while the investigation is ongoing, and in the meantime, police are interviewing neighbors and possible witnesses to figure out what was truly happening behind those doors the last 4 years.
Breaking news, a shootout between this guy and the FBI 2 years ago has just led to a massive arrest of over 100 members of a global pedophile network. This is a tragic and sad story, but I'm thankful that these people are being arrested and brought to justice. So this is David Lee Huber. He was born and raised in Louisiana, but he eventually moved to southern Florida where he lived for most of his life. And on February 2nd, 2021, the FBI showed up to his front door because they were serving a warrant for his involvement in a CP case. And apparently the things that this guy was doing involving the CP were graphic and disturbing, so they sent out a huge force to take him in. So when agents first showed up at his door to serve this warrant, he saw them on his Ring doorbell camera, grabbed a rifle, and immediately began firing at them. A lot of the officers returned fire, but unfortunately 2 officers were struck and killed immediately. These were officers Daniel Alfin and Laura Schwarzenberger. Laura was killed instantly, but Daniel was hit and managed to return fire before he was killed. So after an absolutely massive police presence showed up and began returning fire, Daniel Lee Huber then barricaded himself inside of his home, returned fire a few times, but eventually took his own life. This obviously led to a massive response from the authorities, and when they looked into the computers and devices that he had in his possession, they were shocked. So apparently Daniel Lee Huber had been tied into an international pedophile ring. This ring operated on the dark web, they had highly encrypted file sharing devices, and this network spanned the globe. And when they found out that this guy was connected to all these other people, an international investigation was launched. Part of this investigation was focused in Australia, where a bulk of the people committing these crimes were located. I mean, all this was made public just yesterday, but the Australian suspects that were just arrested are between 32 and 81 years old. They're highly intelligent, as was stated on the release. They know how to manipulate computers and internet networks. And a lot of these members of this ring were producing and sharing their own CSAM or CP, which means that these men were some of the worst of the worst. But this led to an international investigation, like I said, and people were arrested here in America as well, a number of pedophiles that were attached to this network. So I definitely would consider this a win. Obviously, we don't know yet who was connected to this, what's going to come out of this, or exactly what these people were doing, but I think this is a step towards justice. And sadly, these 2 agents who heroically sacrificed their lives trying to protect children ended up saving so many more. But yeah, just here in America, 43 people connected to this investigation have already been arrested for producing CP, possessing CP, all of that. And I'm hoping they will arrest hundreds more.
This man was eaten alive by bugs, and whatever you do, don't look up the pictures. The case I'm about to explain takes place in the United States on September 12th, 2022. LaShawn Thompson was a 35-year-old man who lived in Georgia, and on July 12, 2022, LaShawn was arrested for a misdemeanor battery charge and he was held in a pre-trial detention. Since he couldn't afford his bail, they then realized LaShawn was suffering from multiple mental health issues, so he was placed in the psychiatric wing of the Fulton County Jail. His family was not informed and had no idea he was being held in this place. During his stay at the prison, LaShawn's mental and physical health began to decline. This was reported by the staff, and the superiors in the prison got this information but did nothing at all to help LaShawn. On the 13th of September, the staff entered LaShawn's cell, and when they entered, they found LaShawn with his eyes opened, covered in bugs, and he was completely unresponsive. The first staff member who found him refused to do CPR on him, and this staff member would later say she was too freaked out to help in any way. Many other staff members would try to resuscitate him, but their efforts failed. LaShawn was pronounced dead shortly after this, and his body was in a terrible state. There has been images of LaShawn's face released after he died. I can't show the pictures for obvious reasons, but his family did want the public to see his face, along with the pictures of his cell. They wanted everybody to know the horrible conditions they kept him in. So if you want to see the image of LaShawn, you can easily find it. I do warn you though about the picture because it is very disturbing. You can see insects all over his face, in his nose, eyes, and even inside of his mouth. The autopsy report also says that his cell was in terrible condition, with insect infestation and other filthiness around him, as you can see in the photo. The report continues by saying his entire body was infested with a large number of small insects. LaShawn had thousands of bites all over his body, and he was covered in his own feces. The picture of LaShawn's cell looks so disgusting and dirty, you can assume it was abandoned. The correction officer who wrote up the report said that he raised concerns about the living conditions he was kept in, and also the decline of his physical and mental health over the 3-month period. These concerns were raised a number of times, but it appears none of the senior staff took any of these concerns seriously, nor did they seem to care about his well-being and left him to die slowly. The photos of LaShawn are some of the most disturbing and sickening ones I've ever seen. If you do decide to look at the pictures of his body, look closely at the defibrillator pads. You'll see bedbugs still swarming and trying to climb up on them. Additionally, the small white spots are lice. For 3 months, this poor guy LaShawn was covered head to toe with bugs, and it was so bad that not only did it cause anemia, but they also ended up burying inside of his skin. This is literally modern day scaphism. This case is absolutely awful, and I can't believe this happened to LaShawn. May he rest in peace.
Whomever coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, did not act alone. This TikTok series is about to blow your mind, but there's a lot of information here, so proceed with caution. The case of John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer clown, is one of the most infamous true crime stories in American history. A brief overview of the case: in the 1970s, John Wayne Gacy murdered 33 young men. He buried them in the crawl space beneath his home and his yard, and he was connected to a number of different crimes. Gacy himself gained infamy because he dressed up as Pogo the Clown on the weekends and volunteered at hospitals and children's birthday parties. Now, the official story says that John Wayne Gacy acted completely alone. He had no help in carrying out any of these murders, but I really don't believe that that's the case. Through all of our research that we did for our podcast, we've determined that Gacy was connected to a number of other killers, pedophiles across America. And he even may have been connected to one of America's other most infamous serial killers, the Candyman out of Houston, Texas. So before we get into this, I want to state that I do believe that Gacy did murder some people, and I think he was very complicit in all of this, obviously, but I don't think that he acted alone. But why do I think that? So to start off, we need to talk about Jeffrey Rignall, this guy who was actually a survivor of John Wayne Gacy. After a night of abuse and essay at the hands of John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Rignall was allowed to go free. But what Jeffrey would go on to tell authorities and the media about what happened that night at Gacy's home is a major thing in this whole conspiracy. Now, Jeffrey would tell the police that while Gacy was essaying him, there was another man in the room. Now, whether or not this other man participated in the essaying or they were there to watch, it doesn't matter. Someone was watching this criminal act occur. He knew he could give a description of the guy, and he knew that someone else was there watching this happen. Then we get to Robert Bob Gilroy, who was a victim of John Wayne Gacy. So Robert Gilroy was abducted on September 15th, 1977. That's the official date that he went missing. He was supposed to show up for an event after that day, but he never showed. But John Wayne Gacy's plane tickets and records placed him as being out of the state at the time. His plane tickets from the time show that Gacy left Illinois on September 12th, and he didn't return until September 16th, the day after Robert Gilroy went missing. Already, these two facts point to a larger conspiracy at hand. There may have been people helping procure victims for Gacy, and he may have been even paying for these victims. And that's when we get to Philip Paskey and John David Norman, two of the most horrific people I've ever read about, and this is where the connections with the case start to get really shocking. And we've talked about John David Norman here on my TikTok before. This guy was connected with the higher-ups in the government. This guy had lots of political power, and he was a known pedophile. Remember, in earlier TikToks, I even told you about how John David Norman was arrested multiple times. He had Rolodexes full of index cards of the people who he was supplying these young men to. And both times, the police departments lost the Rolodexes and lost all the names of the abusers. But how did they connect to Gacy? Well, in part 2, we're going to talk about it.
This man kicked his mom's decapitated head down the street, and this case is absolutely heartbreaking. The case that I'm about to explain takes place in Long Island, New York in 2014. Patricia Ward was a 66-year-old woman who lived in Long Island and worked as a language professor and was loved by her coworkers and students. Patricia was described as a quiet person and was always seen walking her dog down the street. Patricia had a son who she lived with, who was a 35-year-old man named Derek Ward. The two of them moved into an apartment together in 2014. Derek had been struggling with his mental health for over a decade, and this was the main reason why he was living with his mother. Over the years, he had been arrested by the police a number of times. One time for a gun charge in 2006 and another time for an illegal substance possession. His issues worsened over the years, but in 2013, his mental health began to decline quickly. His grandfather passed away in 2013, and this is what is believed caused his mental health to spiral. Derek was known as a non-violent person, and Patricia wanted the best for her son. She helped her son with his mental health appointments whenever she could, and would also book them for him to make sure he was getting the exact help he needed. Derek was also taking medication. People that knew them said Patricia always protected her son and was always with him. But on the night of October 28, 2014 at around 7 p.m., neighbors of Derek and Patricia looked outside and saw something truly horrifying. They saw Derek dragging a corpse onto the street and then kicking a human head. As Halloween was around the corner, neighbors assumed it was just some sort of prank. But sadly, this was no prank at all. Upon looking closer, they realized the body was indeed real. Derek had dragged his mother's body into the street and had kicked her head down the road. Police were called and they arrived at the scene. They then found the body of Patricia lying in the street only in her underwear. Her head was found 20 feet from where her body was laying. Derek was nowhere to be seen, but his neighbors saw him dragging his mother's body into the street, so obviously he became the #1 suspect. Officers then followed the trail of blood from outside into the house and were met with a pool of blood and a knife that had clearly been used in this brutal attack. 30 minutes after they received the call about Patricia, operators received another call. The call was coming from the railway workers in the city, and someone had jumped onto the train track into an oncoming train. Investigators went to the scene and discovered the person who jumped onto the tracks was Derek. He was found with a gun and 100 Valium tablets. After Patricia's murder, an autopsy was done on her body. The report says she had broken ribs and multiple stab wounds around her body. What caused Derek's outburst is unknown. All we know is that Derek lashed out and attacked his own mother, the one person who truly cared about him and took care of him. He beat her, stabbed her, and then decapitated her. He then sat in the apartment for a little bit where his mother's body was laying. After a couple minutes, Derek dragged his mother's body and head onto the street and proceeded to kick her head down the road. Derek then walked about a mile away from the scene when he found the train tracks and jumped in front of an oncoming train, ending his own life. It turns out Patricia booked Derek an appointment regarding his mental health. He had ran out of his medication he was taking for 4 days by the time of the murder. And what is tragic is he was only 2 days away from the appointment to get the medication he needed. The most likely reason for this to happen is likely Derek not having access to the medication he needed. If Derek got the appointment sooner, it could have most likely saved Patricia's life. Patricia also told her brother that Derek's behavior became extremely erratic in the days leading to the murder. It's also reported Derek heard voices in his head following the passing of his grandfather, and for this he spent 6 weeks in a psychiatric hospital. It's very rare you find a case like this where you feel bad for both the victim and the perpetrator. Mental health is no joke, and hopefully in the future help will become more accessible and efficient. This case is truly heartbreaking, and I really feel bad for both Derek and Patricia.
This is Shannon McCool, one of the worst pedophiles of all time. I'm going to warn you right now, this story is incredibly disturbing and hard to listen to, so viewer discretion is advised. Shannon McCool is from Australia, and according to interviews that he gave after his arrest, he started having these feelings towards other children when he was 15 years old. So from a very young age, he felt these pedophilic behaviors and desires. In the year 2011, he began working for the Families SA, which is a part of the Australian government that oversees childcare and abuse. And through this government job, he was able to get access to hundreds of children. These kids had been through it all already. They came from abusive and negative backgrounds, and he took this and used it to his advantage. He was able to get access to these kids for years, and even though other employees reported that he had been acting inappropriately with these youngsters, nothing happened. The government agencies ignored these red flags and kept him under their employment. But in the shadows, Shannon was engaging in some of the most deplorable internet behavior I've ever read about. He was a moderator for a website called The Love Zone, a website which had connections to Peter Scully, Richard Huckle, and a number of other pedophiles that we've talked about here on my TikTok in the past. But apparently, for other pedophiles to get access to this massive library of CP and become a member of the Love Zone, they had to upload their own user-generated CP at least once a month. This means that Shannon wasn't just taking kids from residential homes, abusing them, filming the videos, and putting them up on the internet for other people to seek out. He was actually encouraging people all across the planet to commit their own atrocious things. And he would then tell them that if you want access to his media, you would have to upload your own. So he was encouraging just so much abuse across the planet. According to Shannon, the first time that he had done something like this was in 2011 when he picked up a kid from childcare, was driving him home, pulled the car over, touched him inappropriately, filmed it, and then uploaded it. And from that point going forward, he was gone, and he eventually worked his way up to being one of the biggest pedophiles on the internet, dealing CP to millions across the globe. One of his alleged offenses even includes the assault of an 18-month-old child. But eventually, Shannon's crimes would come to the light. And that's when Task Force Argo stepped in, a division of the Queensland Police Service, who specifically investigate child exploitation and abuse online. I find it interesting that they use a scorpion as their logo for the task force because the scorpion is the natural predator of the Australian stone spider, and pedophiles in Australian prisons are referred to as stone spiders. Well, eventually, there's a longer story that I could go into this about how the police actually ended up running a pedophile website and busting a ton of people, but that led them to Shannon McCool's house. Now, when they investigated his home, they found over 53,000 CP images, a good number of which he was actually directly involved with producing. And in total, after all of their investigation was completed, they had recovered over 100,000 CP still images and over 600 videos from Shannon. In 2015, he received 35 years in prison for his crimes, but recently his sentence was slashed. And I don't think that he'll be in there long enough.
This guy is one of the most awful serial killers there has ever been, and I feel like he's never talked about. In my opinion, this guy's worse than Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer. Hi Meg, I talk about your crime. Let's get into the story of The Butcher, the worst serial killer Canada has ever seen. Robert Pickton was born October 24th, 1949. in British Columbia, Canada. Robert had quite a bad upbringing. His dad was very abusive. He actually grew up on a pig farm. From a really young age, him and his brother had to work countless hours on this pig farm, and then they were forced to go straight to school without taking a shower or anything. Because he was showing up to school unwashed, Robert started getting bullied, and they gave him the nickname Stinky Piggy. As Robert grew older, he was said to be very quiet, but he apparently sometimes had these weird bursts of bizarre behavior. These bursts would come out of nowhere, and he would just start acting really strange. In 1996, Robert's brother opened up a kind of charity thing. The charity was started to try to make more money for their pig farm. It was called the Piggy Palace Good Times Society. And what they would do is they would hold huge parties and raves to try and raise money. And I'm not joking when I say huge parties and raves. 17,000 people were said to have shown up at one point. 17,000 people at once. Sex workers and biker gangs would join these parties as well. But for Robert, it all started going downhill in 1997 when he attempted to murder a girl. I don't usually do this in these videos, but a lot of you ask what blush I use, and this is the blush I use. It's usually £10 on the TikTok shop, but it's on for $5 right now. So if you click right here, you can get it. I just ordered kind of a peachy version of this. I'm not being paid to talk about this. I just saw they were on offer, and you guys ask about these all the time. So get your hands on them for cheap while you can. So Robert attempts to murder a woman for the first time that we know of. According to her statement, he attempted to handcuff her, and then he started stabbing her multiple times before she managed to get away. This should have been the thing that got him on police radar, but he was able to get the charges dropped because the woman he attacked was on a lot of drugs at the time, and Robert used that to come up with a story. He told police, like, she was hitchhiking, I was just trying to help her, and she attacked me. And they believed him because she was on drugs. And unfortunately, for the next 60 women he would kill, he was let go. And he was able to come up with a strategy that wouldn't get him caught next time. He developed a plan and started killing a bunch of women. And Robert was really, really good at staying under the radar. Now, what did he do exactly? Let me tell you. Because it's disturbing. First of all, he always went for hitchhikers, addicts, or prostitutes. And what he would do is he would promise them money, drugs, accommodation, anything to get them back to his farm. Once he got them back, he would then shoot or strangle them to death. And this next part is why he was given the name the Butcher. He would take the victims' bodies, chop them up, and feed them to his pigs. Now, if you're not aware of this already, pigs will literally eat anything. Everything. So the evidence was just, bye. They were getting rid of the evidence for him. All of a sudden, there is an increase in missing women in the area. But sadly, because he only went after sex workers or addicts or hitchhikers, no one cared. And this always makes me so mad with cases like these. Like, they're still human beings, but no bodies were showing up, so there was no crime, no body, no crime. But as the numbers started rising, people were kind of getting a bit worried. A group of people that weren't the police actually got a list together of all of the names of these young women who were missing. They brought that to the police and were like, do you see now? And that's when the investigation actually began into finding out what happened to these girls. And all of these girls had one person in common: Robert Pickton. He was the only person whose name continuously came up when they were looking for these girls. Police needed a way to get onto the farm with a warrant without him knowing about it and hiding all the evidence first. And so they heard that he had possession of an illegal firearm. And so they used that as the cover-up to get onto his property. On the property, they found multiple items that belonged to these missing women, along with some blood-stained clothing and tiny bone fragments. Now, things aren't looking too good for Robert, but because the pigs had eaten all the evidence, basically all of it, they were only able to charge him with the murder of 6 women. And so he got 6 counts of murder. When he got arrested, he actually said that he killed 49 women and that he was sad that he didn't get to round up to 50. What the hell, Robert? What does he want the police officer to say, like, oh, I feel so bad for you? No! He was arrested in 2002, and this trial was huge. Of course, he was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. But guys, that's not the worst part of this story, because I'm getting to that now. One element of the story that I kept out until now is that Robert sold the meat of his pigs to people who lived around the area. These pigs, who ate the remains of 60 women, were sold to his neighbors. When I say neighbors, I just mean people who live in the area. So, like, secondhand cannibalism. I could never eat pig again if that was me. So yeah, they were pretty disturbed and freaked out by this information, which is totally understandable and just totally disgusting. After a huge search of his property, police now believe that the number of women Robert killed was in the 60s. 60 women. 60 mother, daughters, wives. It's insane. It really annoys me with cases like these. I know it was like in 2002 and things have changed, but have they? I find that a lot of cases like these that I cover always start with, oh, all these women were going missing, but they were sex workers, but they were drug addicts, who cares? And it's like, it's insane to me that like they're not seen as equals to any other woman walking on the street, but whatever. Hopefully that changes. And for those wondering, I have actually covered this story before, but the quality of the video was so bad that I couldn't keep it up anymore. Like, it really bothered me to watch back, so I thought I would remake it in a higher quality way. I hope you guys enjoyed it regardless, and have a wonderful day. My heart goes out to every single one of the victims, their families, and people who cared about them. And I hope Robert rots in jail. Anyways, this is not a good representation of Canadians. We're actually really nice people. I'll see you all in the next video. Love you guys. Bye.
This is R. Kelly, a convicted pedophile and one of the most successful artists of all time. This is part 2, so go watch part 1 if you haven't already. So after a video began circulating that allegedly showed R. Kelly urinating on and sexually abusing a minor, he was arrested on 21 counts of CP. So while he was facing these charges for producing this video in Chicago, investigators in Florida also obtained a search warrant to search his home there, and what they found there disturbed them. Apparently, when they executed the search warrant, they found a digital camera wrapped in a towel which contained 12 photos of him abusing a minor. And according to them, the girl that appeared in the video from Chicago also appeared in the photographs in Florida. So they arrested him in Florida, but later on these charges were actually dropped because of a lack of probable cause for the search warrant. And after the trial in Chicago, he was also found not guilty on all charges. So later on, in a divorce filing that was unsealed in the year 2020, it was found out that R. Kelly's ex-wife accused him of molesting a girl in 2009 as well. And he had gotten away with all of this for the moment, but in 2015, everything changed. It was during an interview in 2015 with Huffington Post Live when R. Kelly was questioned about the sexual abuse allegations that had been made against him. Apparently, when questioned about the allegations, he asked the reporter if she had drank that day, he threatened to leave and go to McDonald's, and he eventually stormed out. This was the first time that he had ever really been questioned about this concretely in a public forum, so it really angered him. And it was only the very beginning. Then in the year 2017, 3 sets of parents came forward and said that R. Kelly was holding their daughters in an abusive sex cult. Allegedly, according to these girls' parents, he had been holding these girls hostage, had been abusing them, and had control over their lives. Then in 2018, a former partner of his claimed that he had intentionally infected her with an STD. And in 2019, a woman named Asante McGee came forward and said that in 2014, R. Kelly had taken her to live with him. But when she showed up at the home, she ended up living with other girls, and that at that point in her life, he controlled every aspect of her life. This led to this famous interview with Gail Kelly, where R. Kelly starts crying. He denies every allegation against him. He said he's being framed. But the evidence was stacking up and more people were coming out and sharing their stories daily. Eventually, tons of women came forward and shared their stories and said that R. Kelly was a monster. And according to some articles that were published, the music industry was actually complicit in this abuse. One report even stated that there was an interaction in 1994 between R. Kelly's manager and his record label. And his manager stated that the record label needed to tell R. Kelly that they would not release any more of his records if he continued to have these weird altercations with minors and underage girls after his concerts. In January of 2019, the Lifetime Network released the 6-part series Surviving R. Kelly, and on February 22nd, 2019, he was arrested and charged with criminal sex abuse. And the details that emerged in these trials were disturbing. Apparently, R. Kelly physically threatened and abused girls and forced them to do sexual things for him. He did keep them in this cult-like atmosphere. He had transported minors across state lines to have sex with them. And even though his legal troubles are still ongoing, he received a 20-year sentence in Chicago and a 19-year sentence in New York.
Imagine getting married only to be decapitated by your husband 3 months later. 21-year-old couple Jared and Angie got married in October 2022. Around 4 p.m. on the 11th of January, police were called to their home in Texas. Police made a grim discovery in the pair's bathroom after finding, quote, what appeared to be the head of the victim to be in the shower, end quote. Angie's body was discovered on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood with multiple stab wounds to her back. It was actually Jared's poor parents that initially made this discovery after entering the home. They then obviously alerted police to what they found. Jared was arrested and has confessed to killing his wife with a kitchen knife. Jared was actually captured on CCTV, casually stealing a bottle of beer from Angie's workplace just minutes after it's believed that he killed her. Angie's friends have reported to police that the couple's relationship was toxic and Jared was very controlling. Jared's bond is currently set at $500,000.
I bet you didn't know the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is based off true events. I am Bubba Sawyer, but you may know me as Leatherface. I was born into a deranged family of cannibals and sadistic killers living in a remote Texas farmhouse. My mother was a quiet woman, but my father was a monster. He was an abusive alcoholic who would beat my mother and us kids whenever he got the chance. As a child, I was always fascinated with the animals that my father would bring home to slaughter. I would watch as he killed them, and I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was the beginning of my descent into madness. One day, my father brought home a chainsaw. It was a massive tool, and I was in awe of it. I begged my father to let me use it, and he eventually gave in. From that moment on, I was hooked. I would spend hours on end, cutting through trees, and anything else that I could find. The sound of the chainsaw was like music to my ears. It was my escape from the reality of my life. But it wasn't until my father died that I truly lost my mind. I inherited his house, and I turned it into my own personal slaughterhouse. I would lure people in and kill them using my trusty chainsaw to do the deed. The screams of my victims were like a symphony to me. One day, a man named Kirk entered my home to barter for gas. I attacked him with a hammer, killing him. A woman named Pam came in after him. She found my living room strewn with human and animal bones. I grabbed her, impaled her on a meat hook, and dismembered Kirk's body with my chainsaw as Pam watched. Jerry came looking for them both. He found Pam's nearly dead, spasming body in a chest freezer. I killed him with a hammer. Later that night, I ambushed their two surviving friends, Sally and Franklin. I killed Franklin with my chainsaw. I captured Sally and brought her back to the house. We tried to include Grandpa in murdering her with a hammer, but Grandpa's grip was weak, and he kept dropping the hammer repeatedly. Sally broke free and ran onto our road in front of our house, pursued by my family. The truck driver attacks me with a large wrench, injuring me, and escaped on foot. Sally, covered in blood, flags down a passing pickup truck and climbs into the bed, narrowly escaping me. I was so angry I let her get away. My family won't be happy about this.